The history of liberalism, where did that come from? Well, that also started with Thomas Hobbes, in a way, because Hobbes, at the time that Hobbes was writing, his, people are evil and, there will be, all this kind of stuff. At the time that he was writing that, nobody was questioning, or very few people were questioning, the idea that there should be kings and priests, mostly men, unless the lineage didn't produce a male child among the kingdoms. Certainly not in the Catholic Church, who were in charge. Nobody was questioning that, but Hobbes suggested that it was possible that people could govern themselves if they could just figure out if just the good people were allowed to participate in governance. And thus kind of cracked the door open for democracy. A generation later, in the 1670s, that was picked up by John Locke in his second treatise on government, where he talked about, life, liberty, and private property. There was no private property among the serfs back then. The ideas that life or liberty were rights was not a given. It was, basically, if you weren't part of the aristocracy, part of the ruling class, part of the blessed few, you were the property of somebody. And John Locke said, no, people can govern themselves. We're fundamentally good. That story in the Bible, it's wrong. People are fundamentally good. Now, it wasn't really until Thomas Paine, in his book, The Age of Reason, that any of the Enlightenment thinkers, and the Enlightenment, and by the Enlightenment, I'm basically putting it at, say, 1640 to around 1790 or 1800. And I realize that's not the official definition of the Enlightenment, but for purposes of this discussion. And you had Rousseau also back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And this is as Europeans were starting to discover that as they colonized the Middle East and Africa, they were discovering indigenous people who had pretty good lives. They didn't have technology, at least as the Europeans did, but they had very good lives. They had, and the idea that they were fundamentally evil just hadn't occurred to them. So there was this kind of perfect storm that because man is essentially good, or humankind, the mankind was the word that was used back then, we can govern ourselves. We don't need kings. We don't need gods telling us, how to govern ourselves.